Our scripture today comes from Revelation 21, 1 to 4. The new heaven and the new earth. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her betrothed. And I heard a voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. God will dwell with them. They will be God's people, and God's self will be with them and be with their God. God will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away." And our contemporary word today comes from the wisdom of Toni Morrison. I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it is important to not ignore its pain, it is also critical to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art. Friends, nearly 5 years ago today, the world changed, even if only for a little bit. Most of us made intentional decisions about our bubbles, our in-person social networks. We made decisions about the places we went to and the people we saw. At a certain point, those bubbles, those social networks, in person and otherwise, shrunk. For most people, those places and people never return to pre-pandemic levels. At the same time, First Community was facing challenges and making bold decisions. I'm sure there were some that didn't see the vision at first, which makes the decision to pivot to a mission-centered church without walls that much more courageous. In Revelation 21, 1 to 4, John is exiled, banished to the island of Patmos for his Christian faith. Isolated from friends and family, he suffers deprivation and hardship. On the mainland, his fellow Christians are suffering persecution, being rounded up, arrested, flogged, and crucified. His own family is endangered. It is in the midst of this, of terror and heartache, of pain and anguish, that John is given a vision. He sees beyond what is, beyond the pain and anguish to the future that God intends. It is given to him to see a new heaven and a new earth. He hears a loud voice from the throne saying, God will wipe every tear from their eyes, and mourning and crying and pain will be no more. God will wipe every tear from their eyes. No more crying, no more mourning, no more pain. No more shootings, no more brown folks swept up without an opportunity to prove their citizenship or innocence. No queer folk being denied their identity or marriage. No more soldiers bloodied and destroyed by war. Nelson Mandela had been in prison since right before the Cuban Missile Crisis. He sat in prison for 27 years. Through the bars, past the guards, on the other side of apartheid, he continued to behold a vision of a democratic, free South Africa without race-based domination, where people live in harmony with equal opportunity. Ludicrous, preposterous, naive vision. But Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. Mandela was certainly human. He was a peacemaker and a freedom fighter. His friends and allies were among some of the most controversial figures in the world. Nelson Mandela, at some level, was a pragmatist, a cautionary rebel who had a vision and did whatever he thought would get him there. A movement throughout South Africa and the global community was fueled by Mandela's insistence to refuse conditional release and by the brutal deaths of student activists. You want to know something amazing about humans? Humans have what John and Nelson Mandela had: the ability to see beyond what is to what might be, beyond apartheid to a non-racial democratic South Africa, beyond pain and death to healing and resurrection. Humans have a capacity and a desire to imagine a future better than the present, a purpose greater than our own lives, and then pray for it, labor for it, sacrifice for it. Without a vision, the people perish. First Community, your pastor, your board, your church began having glimmers of a vision, glimmers of a future that was bigger, finer, bolder, and more faithful. The church didn't come by the vision by accident. The congregation and Pastor Ray asked for it. You put the question directly to God. God, what is it? What is your vision for First Community Church? What did God have in mind for an almost 75-year-old church that had fed people, fought for fair housing, and marched for civil rights? A congregation that went through tough conversations to be able to affirm LGBTQ plus rights. A just peace, an open and affirming access to all congregation. The congregation heard God calling it to live out our Christian faith. Jesus and his followers ministered at the crossroads in their day and at the contested areas between slave and free, male and female, Gentile and Jew and Samaritan, rich and poor, sick and well. We heard God calling us to roll up our sleeves, wade in, and minister at the crossroads. In the contested areas of our time, between Black and white, rich and poor, housed and unhoused, migrants and citizens, queer and straight, and in one way or another, that has been our work. First Community heard God shouting from heaven, adapt or die, evolve or perish, adjust or succumb. To do all these things, the church put its financial house in order. It reorganized in important ways. Much of that work still continues. We haven't yet realized every part of the vision God laid before us, but then neither did Nelson Mandela. Like him, however, we saw some of it come to pass. The vision of a mission-centered church without walls has been and remains a collective effort. And to go forward, we must be open in uncertain times when it's not easy to be open. Imagine for me, if you will, George. You see, George is a lot like us. Inside George's bubble, are all the people that George meets and all the places that he goes, where he loves God with everything that he is and loves his neighbor as himself. But George has a problem. Along the way, George has noticed that there are lots of other people outside his bubble. So one day, George talks to Florence about this problem he has. Florence can't believe her ears since she has the same problem. And so they decide to work together. In addition to loving God and loving their neighbors, they start to pool some of their resources. And eventually, the two of them, once again, find out they can only do so much. They each talk to someone. And guess what? Those people talk to someone. The pattern continues as more and more people are welcomed and love their neighbors and pool some of their resources. This is how we make the most of our efforts and pool our resources by working with denominational and ecumenical partners and with our community partners. And when it becomes too much, we must tell somebody, invite somebody, and pool resources. If you believe in visions, in committing to a future finer than the present, and a purpose greater than your own life, if you believe God endowed us with wit and imagination and a ravenous hunger for justice and a thirst for mercy, so that we see past what is to what might be, I invite you to be like George and Florence, to build up your bubbles and to invite people. Those in worship are going to receive a building block when they leave to remind them of the vision we are building, a new heaven and a new earth. If you'd like that block, let me know and I will send one to you. You know, there's one big difference between John and us. John was utterly alone, bereft of companionship, exiled, banished, solitary on an island. We, on the other hand, have each other. We are also each other's cheerleaders and champions. On the day of this church's annual meeting, here is what I know. It is good to be church.